In the Autism Internet module, you learned about or got a very quick preview of all of these different types of social narrative strategies. And so in this, I'm going to just show you some examples. And then there's also a handout included with this page that provides a summary of social narratives from the Autism Internet modules and links to lots of resources for you. So there's a variety of different social scripts. One of them is conversation starters, and this I found on the Ocali page in their resource gallery. And so conversation starters are maybe common questions you might ask or just tips for helping the student know what to talk about in a certain context. So for example, if you're going to go to the movies with somebody and you're maybe working on making that plan, you're not going to talk about something else. You need to be able to talk about movies. Or maybe you're at the movies, and usually when you're at the movies, you might also talk about movies. And so, here's some common questions you might ask related to that topic. Next one, birthdays. If you know that somebody's birthday has been, in the last few days or is coming up, likely you're going to ask them about their birthday. And so this is just, again, a couple tips, suggestions for how to get a conversation started about that person's birthday. Scripts, there's a lot of different scripts we can use, and I like this simple scripts suggestions from Star Autism, and this is linked in your handout. And I like that it just goes through how to select, identify, make, perspective, look, and evaluate. So that way you can make sure you're covering the basic components for developing a script. Also keeping in mind the student's age, their grade level. So you want whatever you're putting together to be both age appropriate and also developmentally appropriate for them. And so you want them to be able to comprehend and understand the information. So you might have words, you might have pictures. You'll decide, do we want to have photographs? Do we want to have cartoons? Do we want to have a line drawing? What makes the most sense to that individual student? And just making sure it works for them. That's the most important part. So here, we're going on a field trip to McDonald's. And this was developed by Terry Berkran. She is I believe, speech path and special educator. She currently teaches in Derby, Kansas. And she developed this so her students could be primed, so taught ahead of time about what the expectations were for this field trip. So, field trip to McDonald's. On Thursday, March 11th, 2025, our class is going on a field trip. Each student will go up to the counter and order from the menu. And you can see here, this visual, they actually had another paper version of this to bring with them so then they could choose which specific meal they wanted and then, what their side was. So they had that. And then the cashier will give you some money back. You will give the money to Ms. Jenny. You will get a receipt with a number on it. You will take your cup and fill it up with your favorite drink. Please put a lid and get a straw. And there may have been some additional parts to her story. These are just a few of pictures that I had. And so, that very simple social narrative walked through the routine of ordering at McDonald's. And with the routines that you write about in the social narratives, depending on your students' needs, so for example, they're going to ride on a bus, they're going to order, they're going to sit down and eat. Maybe they didn't need instructions for how to ride on a bus or how to eat or how to pick up afterwards, but they were really focusing on the ordering part so students could order as independently as possible. Okay, this next example is using power cards. And I did want to call your attention to the author, Elisa Gagnon. She is a Kansan, and for, we'll say, quite a while, she was a educator in the Blue Valley School District. She was there as a autism consultant for many years, and so I know her quite well. Actually, I used to babysit her daughter when I was in graduate school. So with power cards, we're going to write a social narrative as well as have a power card, and we want to use the students' area of interest, their enthusiasm as we're writing this, and we want the interest to be experiencing the same thing as the student. So the one I'm going to show you in, for specifics here, I had a high school student, and he asked tons of questions during class. And whenever he had a question, he would raise his hand. And then before the teacher would have an opportunity to call on him, he would just shout out, excuse me, Mrs. Swanson, I don't mean to be rude, but. And so sometimes his questions were, on topic related to what the class was, and frequently his questions were, I'm going to say, were off topic and not related to the course. So here's a social narrative, and his interest was Seinfeld. And with the show Seinfeld, he knew every single episode. He could tell you, like, if you gave him a line from a show, he could tell you what season it was, what episode it was, what the name of the episode. He could quote back episodes. I mean, he really knew his Seinfeld. So using that interest, so I was working at the time with Lisa Barrett Mann, and she wrote this. So if there's one thing Jerry Seinfeld can't stand, it's a heckler. Hecklers call out comments during a comedian's performance. Some of them do it to deliberately be rude, but others do it because they think that they're being clever. What those people may not realize is that their comments really distract the performer. When Jerry goes on stage, he has planned out just what he wants to say and when. People interrupting him, even ones who mean well, can make him forget what he was going to say and mess up his act. Okay, so putting everything towards Jerry there. Calling out questions or comments in class when you haven't been called on is a lot like heckling. Teachers plan out their lessons and lectures ahead of time. They need to concentrate on what they're going to, or what they're doing, so they can't always stop every time a student raises a hand. Jerry Seinfeld knows what it's like to be heckled, so he gives kids these tips for when they want to call out questions or comments in class. So, raise your hand and wait to be called on. If the teacher doesn't call on you, write down your question or comment and put it aside. Later, when there's time after class, you can make your comment or ask your question. Okay, so that part's the social narrative, and it outlined, what the issue was and described Jerry Seinfeld experiencing it, then relate it to school, and then Jerry gives those 3 tips. And then the power card is right here. And so this is something that we would put on initially the front of the student's binder, or maybe, if they were at a classroom where they weren't moving frequently, maybe it's in the corner of their desk, but this is the visual. And the student can refer to it to remind themselves, what am I supposed to do? Like, ooh, I already asked a question, what do I do next? And then also the teacher, instead of telling the student to, I can't call on you right now, we don't have time, you've already asked 10 questions, they can just go over and point to Jerry as a reminder, and they don't need to say anything. And then over time, So the student would read the social narrative at least once a day initially, and then it's faded over time. Maybe they read it a couple times a week. Maybe if we're seeing a spike in asking questions, maybe we refer back to it. But over time, the goal is to fade down the card. So maybe the 3 tips go away and we just had that picture of Jerry. And it wouldn't be unusual for a student to have a sticker or something like that on the front of their notebook. It wouldn't stick out and look unusual. And so he could just have that as that visual reminder. And again, the teacher could point to it as needed. Okay, cartooning was another strategy that was mentioned in the module. And so here's just a quick one, and I know you can't really read it, so I'm going to read it to you. So in the 4 quadrants, we have, of course, there's two kids here, and then we have thinking bubbles and thought bubbles. So the upper left corner is Tom, and his thinking bubble says, I think I'll ask that kid if he wants to play. And then the talking bubble is, hey kid, do you want to play? And then Nolan, or it's not Nolan, AJ, sorry. His thinking bubble, he called me kid. He doesn't like me. And then the talking bubble, don't call me kid. And then he kicks Tom. And then Tom, his thinking bubble says, why is he kicking me? I just wanted to play with him. And then his talking bubble says, ouch. And then AJ, his thinking bubbles, I'm not a kid. And his talking bubble, don't call me kid. Okay, so this is something you would do with a student where, a situation has already happened. So, and then you, the adult, asking AJ, what occurred? Tell me about this. What did he say? What did he do? What did you say? What did you do? And you might have to read between the lines a little bit to kind of figure out what happened, especially if, Tom's not available. And so in this situation, you were able to figure out that Tom, maybe he called him kid because he didn't know what AJ's name was. Maybe AJ's a new kid at school, or maybe Tom's new at school. Okay, so you got to kind of work that information out, and then working with AJ, he needs to figure out this information with some guidance from us. So maybe asking some questions like, have you ever met Tom before? No? Well, do you think he knew your name? Or, do you think he might not know who you are and called you kid instead? That kind of thing. And so coming up with the results. And so down at the bottom, and this is the student's words, AJ's words, Tom called me kid because he didn't know my name, but wanted to play with me. Next time Tom or someone calls me kid, I'll tell them my name and that I don't like to be called kid. I'll apologize to Tom and tell him my name is AJ. I will also tell him I don't like being called kid. Please don't call me that again. So using, cartooning to some simple stick figures there, you can do this in the moment, helps make the social interaction static. So that way the student can see what's happening, and then also adding in those thought bubbles, because students with autism typically do not have theory of mind skills, and so understanding that somebody else is going to have different thoughts, feelings than you do. Okay. Next couple of things I have here kind of help students, again, working through social situations that happened that maybe had gone awry, or it could be other types of situations. It doesn't just have to be social. And so you're just, talking with the student. And I should add with this, these are not punitive in any way. They're just problem solving. And so we're going to talk with the student about what happened, what was the error. So was it, I think I had this for social errors. Who was hurt by the social error? What should be done to correct the error, and what should be done next time? You can also use these for good situations. So let's say, with the Tom and AJ, maybe next time they had a good social interaction, we could go through this with AJ and talk about why the interaction was positive. And so that could help link his behavior to the consequences. So, him talking to Tom and saying, I'm sorry I yelled and kicked you last time. My name is AJ and I really don't like being called kid. Would you like to play with me? And then they play. And so you can use this to work that out. And again, using this for both positive situations and not. Okay. And then here's a similar type tool, SOCS, situations, options, consequences, choices, strategies, simulation. Working through the who, what, where, when, why. What were your options? What are the consequences? Which choice do you want to pick? What's your strategy? Your action plan. And then there's time for simulation and then some follow-up. All right, here we have a simple acronym. So think about some of our students, they get excited and they can't wait, or maybe they have challenges with their executive functioning, which would also be waiting. They might also have difficulty using context, so being able to read the room. So with this simple acronym, stop, observe, deliberate, act, or SOTA strategy. And I'll say Marjorie Bach right now, I believe she works at Emporia State. So we're going to, we're walking into the situation. I'm going to stop. I'm going to observe and see what's going on around the room. What are people doing? Then I'm going to deliberate and decide, what am I going to do? And then I'm going to act upon it. So it helps break down, so we can see what's going on. I can look at the context of the situation. It also allows me to think back and use skills that maybe I've learned elsewhere, and then I can apply them to this new or novel situation. All right, and then consequence maps. These are great tools for showing the student what their options are. And with these in particular, I like the color coding, and it also gives the student a way to turn their behavior around. So, right here we go, it's time to work. I pick a choice for work, and then it shows the good path, color coded green, and the not so good path, color coded red. And then here we have the, how they can turn their behavior around. Now, for our students who are really concrete thinkers, if we did not have the way to turn your behavior around, visually it's going to look like if I choose to refuse, I have to keep going down the refusal path. But with this, it shows that they can change their behavior. Now, I might adjust where these arrows are a little bit, because maybe it's going to go over here to I start my work. But I mean, that's a really good, simple way to show students their choices. And then here's another one. I mean, simple. This is for picking your nose. And this is using red and green choices. It's also color coding, but the red and green choices, green are, good behaviors, positive behaviors, maybe things that you get recognized for doing something well. So maybe they're going to get reinforced, they're going to get praise from their teacher, from their parent, from their peers. And then the red choices, they're not going to be earning those positive things. Okay, and both of those were created by Katie Thomas and Joni McLaughlin. Okay, and then conversation maps. This can, we can do some pre-planning. And this one, I did get it from the Ocali resource guide, but I do have Scott Bellini's book. And so again, just pre-planning. What am I going to do? What am I going to say? So, who do you want to play with? Why do you want to talk to them? What's the person's interest? You can map all of those things out. Maybe this is early in the day and we know, in 2 hours from now, we're going to go to the playground. So who do I want to play with on the playground? What, piece of equipment or what activity am I going to ask them to do? Who's my backup person if person number one doesn't want to play or isn't available? What are we going to talk about? And so that way our students can, be rehearsing this. So actually have a practice with an adult or another student, and then, go out there and do it. Okay, turn taking. This can definitely be a challenge, and so this can help with some of those narratives. So maybe we have, for a game that we're playing, maybe we have a social script, but we need to make it a little bit more visual. So, we might say, with our script here, whose turn is it? It's my turn. It's your turn. And then some additional visuals to go with it. So we have the my turn, green, wait when it's not your turn, and then what do you do when somebody else is talking? So keep quiet, listen to what they're saying. Have I made a comment, asked a question, or told a story on this topic, which may or may not be appropriate to the game, but I think you get the idea. And I'll say the visuals, those all came from Boardmaker. Okay. Okay, this last thing here, I'm not going to play it. You can go to Model Me Kids and watch them, but video modeling is a great strategy to use for teaching social, what to do in social situations. So Model Me Kids has a whole bunch of short little clips that you can watch for what some video modeling can look like. Of course, these are all very professional videos. Next semester in 853, you're going to have an opportunity to make some video models related to something academic in your classroom. But again, great strategy. Well, that was a very quick rundown of just a few examples of what those social narrative strategies could look like. And just a reminder on these, we use them for both desirable behavior, so things we want the student to do, and we can also use it for corrective strategies. From social stories, which I didn't give you specific examples of social stories or social articles because they do follow a specific formula, which your handout is linked to that information. But I write social narratives because there's no formula to follow. It's just easier for me to remember. But all of these are really good, simple strategies, and they can definitely be used with any student, not just students with autism.